All right. Hi. Hi, babe.
Hi, honey.
How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I am good. I'm even gooder because we have a guest today who I'm really excited about. As many of my listeners or our listeners know, I worked at Disneyland for quite some time.
Hmm.
And you and I have always had a nice connection with the parks and with the movies and all of that.
And the Jeepers and the Creepers.
And today we have we have a doctor in the house. We have Dr. Disneyland himself, Mr. Jeff Barnes. Jeff is a Walt Disney historian, and he's the author of two best-selling books, The Wisdom of Walt and Beyond the Wisdom of Walt, each capturing the details of Walt Disney as an entertainment legend, his life, lessons, his successes and failures, and how those can kind of teach us all a little bit about our own lives. He's also a motivational speaker and workshop presenter. Jeff channels his love for Disney into engaging live and virtual experiences for audiences, helping them to learn life's greatest lessons and discover the foundation of the magical destinations that are loved around the world. Mr. Jeff Barnes, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. And wow, you nailed the introduction. So, congratulations. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thanks. I'm so excited to have you. I'm a big Disney fan, and actually, this was an exciting get for us. I was very thrilled for you to click on and join
Well,
us.
I've got to ask you. I love talking with cast members, whether current, former. So what did you do in the parks?
I was part of the character department.
Ooh, you,
Yeah.
you probably can't talk about which character.
There's a bit of a taboo around that, and people say like, "Oh,
Yeah.
I was friends with this person or that person," but it was a job, and I don't think it ruins the magic by talking to adults about it. So I was all the tall characters. I'm a tall guy, so anyone from
Okay.
Goofy, Woody, Sully, Mr. Incredible, the Queen of Hearts was one of my favorites. So big collection of characters there.
Wow. So you have stories, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, yeah. The entertainment department at Disneyland is known for quite a few
Yeah. Yeah.
Shenanigans.
shenanigans. Is a good word. Yeah.
Yeah.
Shenanigans.
So, one of my favorite stories, and I share this in my keynote often. I was doing a kickoff breakfast for a school district here in Riverside County a couple of years ago. And when I was done, a teacher who had worked in the district for about 3 decades came up to me, and he had just randomly gotten this email a couple of days earlier. And it was from a student that he had taught in second grade about a dozen years earlier, and it said, "Dear Mr. Wilder, you probably don't remember me. I was a student in your second grade class 12 years ago. You gave us a journal assignment. You asked us to write about what we wanted to do and who we wanted to be when we grew up. And I wrote about how I wanted to be Mickey Mouse at Disneyland. And whenever I shared that with anyone, I got laughed at, mocked, scoffed, except for you. You wrote in my journal, if that's what I wanted to do, if that's who I wanted to be, go for it. And I'm writing to you today, Mr. Wilder, to say, as of this morning, I am Mickey Mouse at Disneyland.
That's wonderful.
And yeah, and I share that with my leadership keynotes to say, if you're looking to figure out where to start leading, you don't have to be Walt Disney, Michael Eisner, Bob Iger, Bob Chapek. Nobody wants to be Bob Chapek today. All you have to be is Mr. Wilder, right?
Right.
Inspire and motivate people to do and be who they've always wanted to be and do what they've always wanted to do.
That's such a perfect life
Well
lesson.
said.
And so, such a basic idea, but I think so many of us forget that past childhood. We forget that
Yeah,
opportunity to do what we want to do, to be who we want to
yeah.
be.
Yeah, so maybe that's our first point today. Just be Mr. Wilder, and let Mr. Wilder inspire and motivate us. Go do what you've always wanted to do. It's okay to be what you've always wanted to be. My dream job was to be a tour guide at Disneyland, a plaid, if you will.
Hmm.
And now I get to travel the country, the world in a vest, standing on stages, being that tour guide for audiences, talking about Walt, guiding them through the leadership lessons that I think the park teaches us. And folks can take tours of Disneyland with me. I'm actually giving one on Sunday. So, we get to build and create and live the story that we want if we choose to.
That's amazing. You're the ultimate plaid. I think so.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what your experience in the park is like if we were to join you on one of your tours?
Well, so one of the chapters in my book is about starting early because I get asked all the time, well, when's the best season? When's the best time to go to Disneyland? And the answer is there's no off season anymore. The parks have really never
Anymore.
been more popular. And
Mhm.
so the answer is the best time is 8 a.m. You got to start early. So, we arrive at, 7:15 to make sure we're there for rope drop. A lot of people don't realize that they let you through the turnstiles about a half hour before the parks officially open. At least on most mornings they do. And so I start giving, historical facts, fun facts, trivia, right out, in the area between Disneyland, DCA, and as soon as rope drop starts, we're off to the races. And I think what's different about what I do is I'm a very attraction oriented individual, meaning I love the rides. That part of me has never left. And so, yeah, we're going to take your tour. You're going to get the history, but we're also going to go on ride after ride after ride after ride.
Sounds
And
good.
I'm going to tell the stories, tell you the history, give you the leadership lessons and the fun facts along the way. And it's going to take us until about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, getting you on 15, 18 of what I think are the park's best attractions with virtually no waiting. Because a little bit about me, I don't like lines. I'm not a big fan of crowds. And so I have sort of mastered, how can you go and enjoy the park without having to put up with what I can't stand, and that is long lines of massive crowds. And so I know, where to go, when to go, what order. And so what is really enjoyable is you take a tour with me, yeah, you're going to know more than anybody else the next time that you go, but it's also repeatable. So you can, follow the pattern that I show you and avoid a lot of the long lines moving forward.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That sounds like right up your alley, Nomi.
Pretty much, pretty much. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about my favorite attraction, which is the Haunted Mansion.
Mm.
Ooh, so this is a great year, or not great year, but great season for the Haunted Mansion. Walt always knew and wanted a Haunted Mansion for his park, and so that started to be talked about as early as the late 1950s. The park opened July 17th, 1955. The challenge, of course, was he had promised to his wife Lily, who doubted his dream for Disneyland, he promised to his wife Lily that his park would be clean.
Mhm.
And ask anyone who was there when they walked in July 17th, 1955, they had never stepped into a public space so impeccably clean, which was a fulfillment of a promise to Walt's wife Lily that Disneyland would in fact be clean. Well, now they're trying to do this haunted mansion. Well, how do you have a rundown, dilapidated, dirty, quote unquote, haunted house inside a clean Disneyland?
Right.
And they went back and forth on it, back and forth on it, back and forth on it. The house itself was constructed and erected in 1963, modeled off of a mansion in Baltimore, Maryland, and then it sat empty for 6 years. And the reason why it sat empty is the Imagineers and Walt got distracted by the 1964-65 New York World's Fair, where
Right.
they did 4 shows, rides, and attractions, including It's a Small World, Carousel of Progress, Ford Magic Skyway, Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. They bring It's a Small World home in the summer of 66, Lincoln 65. They open up New Orleans Square in 66. Walt will die in December of that year. Pirates which originally was going to be a pedestrian walk-through wax museum. But they figured out, well, if we can do a boat ride for dolls, why can't we do it for pirates? And they don't get around to actually doing the attraction for Haunted Mansion until August of '69.
Wow.
And a couple of really fun facts. It's the only attraction built simultaneously for both Anaheim and Walt Disney World in Orlando. And
Oh.
so even though the house sat empty for 6 years waiting for them to build the show building that sits beyond the berm outside of the park,
Mhm.
they built two of everything, set it aside, then shipped it to Florida. It was the first attraction finished for Florida and sat completely ready for an entire year while the rest of the park got constructed. And so it's the irony that you have this empty house with nothing to do for 6 years here in California, and a completely finished house and finished attraction for an entire year waiting for everything else to get caught up in Florida. The stretching room, the purpose of the stretching room is to take you underground so that you can walk beyond the berm, underneath the railroad tracks, and into the show building. You don't do anything inside the house that you see.
Mhm.
It all takes place outside of the park itself. My joke is, well, how far does the stretching room or the elevator take you? And the answer is, what's the Haunted Mansion? It's got to be 6 feet under, right? But no, the answer is 18 and a half feet down. And it's a beloved attraction. People loved it when it opened in August of '69. I like it even better as the overlay for Nightmare Before Christmas. And it's a shame that Walt never got to see it.
Why do you like the overlay?
Um, it's a great question. I think for me, it ties two wonderful holidays together, Halloween and Christmas. And to watch the transformation that takes place in the attraction in the house is really amazing. And then there's sort of a personal connection. Garner Holt of Garner Holt Productions, who today is the world's largest maker of audio animatronics, he got his start with Disney by doing the Jack Skellington that you see at the start of the Graveyard. He did that back in 2000 or 2001.
I didn't realize that. He went on to do a lot for Knott's Berry Farm as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And he and his creative director Bill Butler, they wrote the foreword for my first book.
Nice. You know what's funny? I never knew that about the simultaneous construction of the two mansions.
Mm-hmm.
That's so bizarre. I can't imagine
Yeah.
with as impatient as people are today. Can you imagine if an attraction just sat up on a hill for 6 years and we just waited and waited and
In
waited?
Arrested Development.
Yeah, and I actually moderated a panel with Imagineers in Florida for the 50th anniversary of Walt Disney World a year ago. And during that 6 year period, all sorts of legends
Mhm.
and rumors and myths sprung up about what was happening in that house, to include that Walt was buried there after he died in December of 1966. His ashes were scattered in there. I mean, lots of like really weird, spooky kind of stuff.
I love it.
There is that video on the internet of what appears to be the ghost of Walt Disney walking from the Haunted Mansion out
Right.
to the water and then to the right.
Yeah, so when I say it's a shame Walt never got to see it, what do I know?
And I admit, I am a purist. I love the Haunted Mansion in its original form that I was introduced to it as a child. So the overlay bugs me a little bit. I don't think I would mind it if it were November, December, or maybe
Fair
even
enough.
January. But the Haunted Mansion is already a Halloween ready themed attraction. But my question
It is a long period.
why don't they do it for any of the other Haunted Mansions in the parks?
So they do it in, as I understand it, Tokyo Disneyland. The reason why they don't do it in Florida is Disneyland is a locals park, whereas Florida is very much a vacation international type destination, and it's filled with a lot of visitors who very well, that might be their one and only visit. And to have the attraction
Wow.
routinely shut down,
Mhm.
uh, 2 weeks to install the overlay, 2 weeks to remove it is quite burdensome for the kinds of guests and tourists that they have on a very regular basis. For us here
Makes
in
sense.
Southern California, if we miss it this week, we'll get it next week.
Right. So that probably explains the Small World holiday overlay as well.
Correct.
That makes sense. I
Yeah,
never thought
we
of
have a
that.
lot more overlays here in California than you get in Orlando. And again, it's just the demographic of being a locals park versus an international vacation destination. Walt Disney World, and Walt said he was never going to do another Disneyland. He hated sequels, he hated repeating himself. Today, Walt Disney World is 150 times the size of Disneyland, our
Wow.
nation's largest single site employer, and the most popular vacation destination on the planet. So be careful about what you say you're never going to do.
So, Jeff, I'm wondering, um, in regard to Walt Disney and his story and his legacy, why do you feel that he is still so relevant today? What about Walt Disney speaks to you most?
So for me, and I was in higher education for more than 2 decades, and I worked a lot as dean of student success with students who were struggling, and it wasn't that they couldn't do it; it's simply that they weren't doing it. They weren't going to class, they weren't doing their work, they weren't taking the exams, and I recognize here in Southern California, the one thing that we all have in common is we love Disney slash Disneyland. And I wanted to find a vehicle slash story that would resonate with the students and I could leverage to get them back on track, back on a path toward graduation. Well, people forget Walt Disney, like all of us, was not born successful, impoverished childhood, difficult relationship with his father, bankrupt with his first studio, 1923, at the ripe old age of 21, loses his first successful cartoon character, which was not Mickey Mouse, but Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. And then nobody believed in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. After the success of Snow White, has more failures with the movies that follow. And even when it came time for Disneyland at the age of 53, most people, to include his own wife and his own brother, doubted him, thinking it would be bankrupt, shuttered, and forgotten in 6 months or less. And so I love that story of resilience. I
Hmm.
love the way in which Walt, for his successes, whether it was Mickey Mouse, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, or even Disneyland, most wanted to be remembered as a storyteller. And a great story isn't about once upon a time or happily ever after ending. A great story requires conflict.
Hmm.
Walt's life was filled with conflict. And if you want to live your own great story, you're going to have to embrace conflict, do hard and difficult things. And chances are, like Walt Disney, you too are going to fail a time or two.
That's excellent. Really smart too. What a way to like bring the students back in. Like, we're going to talk about Disneyland today.
Mm.
Yeah, and show them lessons from not just the park and Walt's life, but even their favorite attractions.
I love that.
How about some of the lore in the park? What are things that you think the average person doesn't know about the park that is um, fascinating to the lore of Disney?
Well, it's hard to define average person because what I think is amazing. Some other person has heard 100 times,
Well,
and
let's
vice
say
versa.
Disney fans. Disney fans, for
So
example, like when do they turn the light on in Disney's apartment and why?
yeah. So my favorite fun fact, and maybe you already know this, because again, how do you define an average Disney fan? My all-time favorite fun Disney fact is that Doritos were invented at Disneyland.
Oh, I do love
And
Doritos.
what's that?
I do love Doritos.
Yeah, I love them too much. And I love the fact that they were invented at the park. When Walt was going all in on his dream, he barely had the money for the land and for the attractions. The restaurants, the shops, the hotel, all of that had to be leased out. And the original Mexican restaurant in Frontierland was leased out to Frito Lay. And over time, every night they would have these excess tortillas that would get dumped into the garbage. And a cast member realized, well, instead of dumping them into the garbage, what if we cut them up, deep fried them, put seasoning on them, and sold them the next day as a snack? And so what started out as Disneyland's garbage over time became the most popular snack in the park. So much so that by
And outside.
1966, what's that?
And outside.
Yeah. By 1966, Frito Lay took its Disneyland snack nationwide, and we know them today as Doritos. And if you go back and look at the original branding, the Doritos bag looks exactly like the old Disneyland sign on Harbor Boulevard.
Oh,
That's how
with the
closely the two
block
are tied.
letters. I never thought.
Yep.
Oh, right behind
Yep.
you. Of course. That's
Yep.
so funny. I never made that connection. Oh, I'm a graphic designer and now. I feel sad.
And so one of the lessons there is, the idea of hire well, train well, don't micromanage, and allow your team members to express ideas. They'll come up with ideas better than you as the manager, better than you as the supervisor, better than you as the CEO.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
Well, truly successful people know how to delegate.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I think that was actually, other than being a phenomenal storyteller, Walt was probably the best casting director. He hired people far better than himself. So, for example, Of Iwerks was really the animator and success person behind Mickey Mouse.
Mhm.
And the only attraction that was ever single handedly designed by Walt Disney is Tom Sawyer Island. Otherwise, it was the Imagineers in WED or Imagineering as we know it today. He was just smart enough to go out and get amazing, talented people, let them go, cast the vision, of course, and allow them to take him to heights that he himself couldn't imagine.
Speaking of, and coming back once again to my favorite ride, the Haunted Mansion, what's the story with the disjointed theme where the first half is very scary and spooky and then the second half is kind of fun and hokey?
So, some of the Imagineers love that, and others were really kind of disappointed in it. And they sort of chalk that up to the fact that it was kind of done by committee and shortly after Walt Disney's death.
Mhm.
And, like I said, some people loved the way that it turned out, and others felt really frustrated by it because it doesn't necessarily tell a single story the way that they feel like it would have if Walt had been there to see it all the way through to fruition.
I have a theory based on something that I read. When you're coming out of the ceiling or the attic, you turn around. And that's
Yes.
supposed to be the bride having pushed us as the ride goer out of the attic window, and then we fall
Yes.
and we die. So that when we arrive to the cemetery, it's not scary because we at that point are no longer living afraid of the dead. We are the dead and a part of the party.
Wow.
And there's a lot of different ways that can be I actually like that interpretation. And a lot of people don't realize because they're just, on the ride and eating something that they're probably not supposed to be eating while they're in their quote unquote doom buggy. They have no idea that they've just been cast out of a window, let alone cast out of a window by a quote unquote bride.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
That's too funny. I never thought of that. That's a really good
That's how
explanation.
I have to rationalize it because it frustrates me. I want it spooky from beginning to end. But if I think about in the course of the ride, I get killed, then it makes perfect sense to me that the tone is going to change once I'm on the other side of that looking glass.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or we'll just go to Phantom Manor where the whole thing's spooky and wonderful.
Yes. I've
Yeah,
also heard
no,
rumors of a.
and
Of,
Phantom Manor is amazing.
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about Phantom
Yeah.
Manor.
Oh, yeah.
So Phantom Manor is at Disneyland Paris, what originally was Euro Disney, and it does have a more consistent theme. And like you said, it is spookier, and it is a reflection of the Imagineers having the opportunity to say, okay, the originals were done more by committee. Let's see if we can't tighten this up and stay more consistent. Because when they were doing the original Haunted Mansion, it was going to be Museum of the Weird. It was going to be a walkthrough. It was going to be this. It was going to be that. I mean, they really had a hard time zeroing in on exactly what it was going to be and what story they wanted to tell.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But by 1992, they had it figured out.
Right.
That's good. I have to say, I love the lore of the Disneyland Haunted Mansion. It's the one I grew up with. But we went to Disney World for our honeymoon back in 2014. And that was the first time that I got to experience the Haunted Mansion there. I think I like it better.
So it is interesting. I just got back from Walt Disney World, and I was there with someone who grew up here in Southern California, 5 miles from Disneyland. She had the fireworks in her bedroom window every single night. And it was constant compare contrast, especially at Magic Kingdom.
Sure.
And she loved their Haunted Mansion.
Yeah.
Absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
And again, it's not one of the like, oh, this is vastly better. Like, I think our Pirates is vastly better. I don't think there's any argument about
For
that.
sure. Yeah.
It's debatable which Space Mountain is better. I think ours is better, and I think ours is vastly better. But for whatever reason, some people like the Magic Kingdom in Florida version better. They're wrong about that, but they like it.
Yeah.
Better.
And oh well.
I think we have, honestly, I think we have a better park, and I do like the rides better. And it could just be familiarity because I born in LA, and I will say though that it's not that Florida I like better. I see areas where Florida took advantage of opportunity that LA hasn't. Like when you enter, it's just dark, it's blackness, and I'm assuming that that's because they have to do the overlay, which is a little bit of a craw for me. But I'd like something when we're loading into the dune buggies to see something other than just vastness. And the library with the stairwells and the footprints, I think it's just phenomenal.
That's my favorite part of Haunted Mansion at Magic Kingdom, Walt Disney World. Yeah. And the main difference there is, first of all, the stretching room is not an elevator. The room goes up, you stay still. Because there's no need to go underground. You're not going to be walking underneath the railroad, going beyond the berm. There's no need for a berm. That's what 27,440 acres gets you. The land that Walt bought is the berm.
Right.
So as soon as you go out of the stretching room, you are immediately getting onto your dune buggy, as opposed to walking through the gallery where the paintings are, walking past the bust, because that walk is getting you from the house to the show building. Right. Well, you don't need that walk in Florida. So as soon as you get off of the stretching room, bam, you're onto your dune buggy. So a lot of what you walk through in Anaheim, you're riding in Florida. And there's the extra scene, which I think is the best scene in either mansion, and that's the library/study scene with the staircases and the ghost footprints. And if the folks who are listening have never been to Florida, trust me, it's amazing.
It's beautiful.
I think they could do that in the loading area here in Anaheim. They could build a library there with a couple staircases that go over our head with the footprints on it. Just something to dress it up, because I understand the logistics of it, but as a ride goer, I do not want my suspension of disbelief suspended.
Yeah. I like our house better, the exterior.
Yes.
I prefer the Baltimore
style
mansion, which looks like a New Orleans type house, more than I do the Liberty Square look.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
So Jeff, I have a question for you about your books. So the Wisdom of Walt
Mhm.
and Beyond the Wisdom of Walt. So you dreamed about writing these books for 20 years, right?
Mhm.
And it took you only 142 days to write your first best-selling book. Uh, so first off, why the wait if it's only going to take you 142 days?
Well, I think I did what a lot of us do, and that is we have an idea and then we immediately begin to doubt ourselves.
Hmm.
We question, who am I? I don't know how. No one would care. On and on and on and on it goes. Walt said all of our dreams can come true if we have the courage to pursue them. I didn't have the courage to pursue it. And I would go on to teach a college course on the history of Disneyland, which was great. But if I'm being 100% honest, I was really teaching the course as a way to get out of having to write the books that had been kicking around in my head for 2 decades. And then the day after, I give the first lecture in what had been my dream course for forever. I get diagnosed with a life threatening brain tumor.
Hmm.
And the neurosurgeon at Cedar Sinai in downtown Los Angeles says, it's life threatening. It's got to come out. Today's Friday. You have the weekend to get your affairs in order. I need you back here on Tuesday for brain surgery.
Wow.
And even if it's not cancerous, unfortunately, it turned out not to be because of the invasiveness of the surgery, you're going to be in recovery and out of work for 2 months. Well, that immediately meant the class would be canceled and probably never be rescheduled again.
Hmm.
Well, I remembered when Walt went bankrupt in Kansas City, rather than giving up, he boarded a train for California, but he boarded that train with $40 a single suitcase and a one-way ticket. My commitment to the class and to the students was we were going to talk about goal setting, we were going to talk about chasing your dreams, we were going to talk about going all in and having a $40 single suitcase one way ticket kind of mindset. Well, how in the world was I going to walk away now? Like, this was an opportunity for me to not just teach the class, but actually live out the lesson. So I
Hmm.
refused the surgery. I refused it for 2.5 months so I could teach my little class on the history of Disneyland. Now, spoiler alert, the class went great. I had the surgery. I survived. And once I went back to work, now all of a sudden, having stared death in the face, I just got over myself. It was like, are you going to write the books or not? And all of a sudden, all of these doubts, all of these questions, all of these concerns, all of these, who am I, blah, 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 blah. I just didn't care anymore. I just said, screw it. And I sat down on November 22nd and started writing and sent it to the editor on April 15th.
Wow. That's amazing. It totally puts things into perspective for sure. Ugh. Well, thank you for sharing a bit about why you're Dr. Disneyland, Jeff. We appreciate your time today. Before we finish up, though, I do have a little rapid fire question session for you.
Ooh, fun, 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 fun.
Yeah. Okay. So these are all Disney associated, but whatever pops into your mind first thing. Okay. So the first one is, uh, Mr. Jeff Barnes, what is your favorite Disney attraction?
Space Mountain,
Oh, okay. What is your favorite Disney animated film?
Dumbo.
What is your favorite Disney live action film?
The first Pirates of the Caribbean,
That's a good one. I do love that. What is your favorite Disney theme park?
Disneyland.
Okay. And what is your favorite Disney song?
Ooh, favorite Disney song. Whoo,
I know it's hard to choose.
it really is hard to choose. I'll pick any song from the Beauty and the Beast soundtrack.
Okay. Nice.
I'm a big Tim Rice, Alan Menken fan. Big Beauty and the Beast fan. I just ate
Hmm.
at Be Our Guest at Fantasyland and Magic Kingdom. So yeah, that's just what immediately comes to mind.
I love that.
And a tribute to Angela Lansbury. Come on, you can't go wrong with that right now, right?
Gosh, what a loss.
Oh, by the way, I was real quick before we go. I was super surprised when we went to Florida's park that the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs ride there was amazing and something that I think is really lacking at the Disneyland park.
So you're talking about the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train?
Yes.
So yes, it is super cool. Smack dab in the middle of Fantasyland. We're there. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea submarine voyage used to be.
Oh yeah.
However, it came at the cost of removing the original Snow White dark ride. And I love the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. I don't know that you could touch the original 3 dark rides here in California. And in fact, I say all the time, there's not much we care about here in LA except for In-N-Out and Disneyland. And if they were to touch Snow White, Scary Adventures, Peter Pan's Flight, and our Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, we would riot in the streets.
I can see that.
No. But they could probably do it where the submarine ride is. I mean, that thing has been a sore for years.
That's a whole nother conversation.
It's podcast number 2 with Jeff Barnes.
I do love Autopia, though. I will say this. Next door to the submarine ride, which would probably have to be the compromise, would be Autopia. And there's something about that ride that I just find so delightful.
Yeah, and I've done multiple events with Bob Gurr, the Disney Imagineer / legend, who designed those vehicles. And it's the only Tomorrowland opening day attraction that remains. And those little cars were so popular from day one that eventually the park would have 3 different versions of Autopia.
Interesting.
That's incredible.
Yeah. There was a junior Autopia, a midget Autopia, a Fantasyland Autopia. There were Autopias all over the place. Kids just couldn't get enough of it.
I remember there was a Fantasyland version when I was a kid. I forgot about that.
Fun.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's time to plan our next Disneyland trip, honey.
That's for sure. We'll go for my birthday.
Jeff, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon.
Well, thank you. You folks have been wonderful.
Oh, likewise. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right. So, gang, if you want to find out more about Jeff Barnes, you can check out his website at thewisdomofwalt.com. That's where you can find his books, a bit of an online history about his Disneyland course, and you can also sign up for his free blog, or you can talk to him about booking him for a keynote and future workshop presentations. And other than that, we'll see you real soon. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.